So, Marie-May, thank you so much for doing this interview. I want to start with the origins of SeyCCAT. So, who initiated its creation and why? Was it a specific gap or need that led to its formation? Was there something missing in the existing conservation landscape?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. I know it's been a long time coming, so very, very pleased that we're having our conversation today. So SeyCCAT itself, the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, it started just 10 years ago, in fact, this year. Back in 2015 is when we were legally established. However, discussions to have a trust started well before that. I think it was part of the Debt for Nature swap that the Seychelles government negotiated together with the Nature Conservancy, or better known as TNC. So as part of this process, the government of Seychelles needed to set up a special purpose vehicle, a structure that would allow for the debt conversion to happen. And so therefore, in order for government of Seychelles to be able to get that loan from the impact investor TNC, it needed to have a financial structure, which in our case is a trust fund. And so therefore, this is how SeyCCAT came to be, with some very clear mandates or actions that it needed to perform. And those included, of course, the on-loaning of the Seychelles debt conversion, so allowing for TNC to send the money through to SeyCCAT and for SeyCCAT to then on-loan that to government of Seychelles. But also, more importantly, it was created to help support ocean conservation, to have a dedicated port of funds that would support marine conservation programs, that would also fund our efforts for climate change and help Seychelles also in its efforts for the development of a blue economy. So these were the core programming, as you would like to say, that led to the development of the Blue Grants Fund, which is now the scheme or the grant mechanism that we have here at SeyCCAT, whereby every year we are able to award projects to Seychellois and Seychellois organizations.
Amazing. Sounds amazing. How did you find your way into SeyCCAT?
For me, I used to be part of the Ministry of Environment. So even from the early days, I was working in the division responsible for biodiversity conservation, and there was a lot of synergies with the work of the trust. And I believe since 2018, I've been involved one way or another with the trust. Before that, I was one of the representatives of the Blue Grants Fund Committee, so the technical committee. So I was here in a technical capacity as one of the experts that would get the opportunity to review projects. So I did that for a couple of years, in fact, until I joined as the CEO in 2022. So very much aware from the very inception. I was part of the recruitment of some of the initial staffing of the organization. So I think it was a very nice transition for me, coming from the government in the space where I understood a lot of the policies and the work that we intended to finance through SeyCCAT, and then also now coming in and being in a position to fundraise for a lot of the policies that I also had helped to develop whilst I was still back in government.
So you've seen it from all the different angles.
Exactly.
So you're the perfect person to be asking all these questions.
We'll see.
So Seychelles is often celebrated globally for marine conservation, but locally many people still feel disconnected from these initiatives. In your own words, how would you describe what SeyCCAT actually does on the ground in the daily lives of Seychelles?
Okay. Yeah, it's always a very difficult one, I think, to explain to people where we're coming from, but also some of the difficulties that we're encountering that makes it a little bit less clear or less accessible to everyone. So in our view, every day, our main function is to fundraise, identify resources from all available sources, from good and proper sources of funds that we could attract onto our shores, and then be in a position to redistribute that to local organizations, to individuals, to aspiring businesses, aspiring researchers, and make that available to them in a mechanism that is a lot less cumbersome than if they were to go outside themselves. And as you may know, a lot of people also who are in this space, they know how difficult it is nowadays to attract resources for conservation in particular. There's a lot of competition. Whilst there are a lot of pledges that are being announced every other day, it is very difficult for Seychelles as a small island state, but also as a high-income small island developing state, for it to attract resources to its shore. So what we do is we make sure that we are the ones that are jumping through all of those hoops. So we have a lot of administrative burden then ends up on us, making sure that everything is in order from our side. We have a good reputation. We are meeting all of those global standards in terms of due diligence that is required from an organization in order for it to access the funds. And then once we bring that in, then we are able to redistribute. Seems simple enough. However, there are also a lot of accountability and transparency things that we have to fulfill. And in doing so, sometimes we do have to transfer some of those responsibilities to the grantees and to the partners that we support. Because if we are giving you money, which is in essence, a grant is free money, you're not expected to pay it back, but you do have to make sure that the money that is issued to you is being used for the purposes that you declare upon application. And that's where the difficulty is sometimes. So you have to be in a position to account for the funds that are given to you and use it wisely so that we can then show impact to our donors, to our partners, to investors, so that they continue to believe and fund the work that we do. And this is sometimes where we do encounter quite a bit of difficulty when we say, well, you have to report. You have to tell us how you've used this money. And a lot of the issues that we encounter with grantees is around transparency and accountability. Yeah.
Super interesting. So you guys facilitate and also oversee.
Yes.
Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into funding. Mm-hmm. SeyCCAT was born from a debt for nature swap. Can you walk us through how that deal actually worked?
Okay. So in terms of the design itself, so Seychelles, initially we had wanted to have a bigger amount that would be refinanced, but at the end of the day, with the Paris Club and the group of countries that were remaining, we mostly had debt coming from one or two parties that allowed us to say, okay, we are going to restructure. That's pretty much what it means. We are going to give you more time, we're going to reduce your interest rates, and so we're going to make it more favorable for the country to be able to repay its debt. And then so TNC came in and said, well, okay, we will buy back this debt, and then you would repay it to us, contingent on the fact that you would, one, Seychelles committed to protecting its EEZ, so Seychelles committed to 30% of its EEZ, so that was one of the key metrics. Seychelles agreed to develop a marine spatial plan in order for it to identify the correct 30% that it was going to protect for its entire EEZ and also for the protected areas. And it also agreed to set up a trust and also agreed that $5 million over the 20 years would go back to support conservation efforts. So these were the sort of the big commitments that said that made Seychelles in a good position to convince the impact investor to embark on this arrangement. So now every year what happens is Seychelles government repays the loan to SeyCCAT, and then we pay it back to the impact investor. So this is a 10-year arrangement, and next year, hopefully, government would have fulfilled the repayment of that loan. However, there is another part that is around the long term, the 20-year arrangement, whereby as part of the repayment, so government then contributes to supporting SeyCCAT, and then also putting $200,000 into the Blue Grants Fund, which we then award every year as part of the Blue Grant Fund cycle. And so that was just the beginning of where the proceeds would come in. So having had done the debt for nature swap, we were then able to also be part of the sovereign blue bond that government issued in 2018. And again here, because of the working mechanisms that had been established with SeyCCAT for the debt swap, government agreed that it would also then put $3 million in proceeds that would be disbursed $500,000 amounts every year into the trust to also beef up the amount of funds that we would be able to put out through our Blue Grants Fund. And that has been the mechanism now for a few years. And the Blue Bond proceeds actually finished in 2023. So we are now just using up the balance in terms of the funds that are still remaining.
Okay, super interesting. Who was it that initiated and negotiated all of this from the beginning?
Okay, so we had some key people obviously at the time, but the main discussions would have started well back in 2008, 2009. Seychelles did go through some difficult times with the economic crises that the whole world encountered. So we did have a high proportion of debt at the time, which prompted government to start those conversations. And we do have key people like, Ambassador Ronnie Gimo, who was based in the States at our offices in New York, who had the opportunity through some of his networks to start having these conversations, I believe, with TNC colleagues who he would meet when he was there. And then, of course, this was then very quickly brought to the attention of government of Seychelles that there would be a possibility for us to work on this amazing debt for nature swap for oceans. There had been debt swaps before, but in another field. So it was the first one done for ocean conservation. And so I think government of Seychelles, who we were quite visionary at the time, really, because of how bold this commitment was, but also in our approach. We were willing to kind of lock it up in proper contracts. A lot of people would have made the commitment, but without really making it binding. But that was one of the boldest decisions, and I think one of the best decisions. Not to be biased because I'm part of this space, but it was really visionary. And a lot of people at the time didn't think that it was going to work. And there was a lot of sort of pushback, and the world was really watching to see how it went. But after Seychelles went through it, we have demonstrated to the world that it can be done. And you see now in the past 3-4 years, there's been replicated blue bonds, debt swap, a lot bigger than ours, but we were the ultimate blueprint. And I think that's a lot to be proud of. It's not been perfect by any means. It's been very difficult, very steep learning curve. But all in all, I think we have been able to showcase as a small country that where there is commitment, where there is willingness and partnership, it can work.
Wow, yeah. Amazing. So where does SeyCCAT's money come from today, and where does it all go? Can you give us a transparent breakdown of your current funding sources and how those funds are distributed across projects?
Okay, so we have what we called a number of donors. I have spoken a little bit about the debt swap, so you know that was one of the mainstream and remains one of the core funding streams for SeyCCAT. So the inflow in terms of the $200,000 that goes to project, and then the funds that comes through to support our operations. So we do have a small team, a very hardworking team, but it has to be funded one way or another, and some of our core staffing is funded through that. And then we have another arm of the trust whereby we work directly as an implementing partner, an executing partner, or a convening agent, depending on the donor. They have different names for this. And here we have a number of international NGOs, like what we call the bingos, so big international NGOs, many of which are from the States, For example, the Nature Conservancy, Pew Charitable Trust, Rockefeller. We also have the Blue Nature Alliance, which is now a grouping of several of those large organizations. We also then have smaller partners that we work with on specific things. So what happens now, for example, right now, we have some large grants that we are administering, and it's about actively cumulative, it's about $10 million that we are now coming in through those direct donors, and it's supporting. A lot of them have been mobilized to support the government in its efforts to finalize the Marine Spatial Plan, to work on its nationally determined contributions. So really bringing in some of the resources to support Seychelles' international commitments. And what we do is, together with government, most of the time for these large grants, the government is the main client. So a government might not be able to fundraise for these things. As a government entity, a lot of those international partners, they cannot give money directly to government, so then we are the throughput under which the funds can come. And then we fund the activities. If it's capacity building, if it's to support development of certain programs with NGOs that government work with or that supports the work of government. Give you a key example, we do have, through an Oceans 5 project, that we ran from 2021 and we are now closing this year, we were able to work with the Fishing Authority, the Ministry of Agriculture, Climate Change, Environment, but also NGOs. We worked with MCSS, we were able to work with the Save Our Seas Foundation, we were able to work with Green Islands Foundation. So a lot of the parties that are already doing delegated tasks on behalf of the government, so we were able to then help them with development of management plans, training of their staff, development of management templates across the board. We were also able to do fish stock assessments for SFA. A lot of the things that needed to be done to support finalization of the MSP, but that we know that government would have not been able to fund for national budgeting. And that has been one of the core support. Similarly, we also then have sub-grant agreements from those big donors that we then use. For example, if government needs to update legislation, needs to do nomination files, need to prepare documents, all of that we are able to cover. And this has been really instrumental in allowing us to not default on any of the loan conditions that was embedded as part of the debt swap. And so this has been ongoing now for the past 10 years, and it is a partnership that still works. And one of the latest funding streams that we do have is from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, and that is a multilateral setup with the UN, whereby we are supporting Seychelles in its efforts to conserve global coral reef status, but also to help in terms of developing businesses that are more coral friendly, or coral positive businesses is the term that we use as part of the program. So that's some of the places where we are able to attract funds.
Thank you for clarifying. So what systems are in place to ensure transparency and public accountability? Can the public access financial reports or project audits? And how do you ensure the same few organizations don't benefit repeatedly?
Okay. Yes, so as part of I think at the beginning I did mention that we do have to maintain a certain standard in order for us to remain sort of eligible as an organization that can continue to continuously tap into those global resources. So one of the key parts of governance for us is open reporting, making sure that our accounts are audited every year on time. In fact, legally under our legislation, the Office of the Auditor General Accounts make sure we are audited every year by an external firm. And I think we are one of the few organizations who actually publishes every year on our website. If you go on our website, you will see our annual financial statements, audited and signed every year published. So for now, if you go, we have until 2023 that is published on our website. We have all of our governance documents, including our investment policies, that are openly available. We have made available now on our website a database of all of the projects that we have funded with information about the applicants, with the possibility for you to come and ask for information about any project that you do find in our record. And so we do make sure that that is something that we offer. We have also been able to, over the years, improve our processes. So, of course, when you start, there are some things that you set up, but you cannot foresee how everything is going to go. So we do have a very strong, very detailed Blue Grants Fund operations manual. Of course, it is an internal document, but it lays down all of the processes. What happens when someone applies, who can apply, the number of projects they can apply, all of that. And what we have done now is, in any given cycle, we are only able to fund one project from one applicant, so that you do have one project running per cycle. Again, to address issues of fairness, but also on equitable access. We have also tried to level the playing field. Obviously, an NGO that has more capacity to write good projects and have a track record of running projects, they will tend to submit more competitive projects. And so in order to do that, we have availed ourselves, our staff, to working with applicants that are less able to do so. We have also introduced what we call a project development grant, whereby if you come to us, you say you have a good idea, and together with the Blue Grants Committee, we can approve for you to get some funding that you can pay someone to sit with you and write your project to submit. So we have tried to see how best we can help, build the capacity of people who have really good ideas, but may not be in a position to fully do it themselves. But I have to admit, it's still a very difficult one. It seems you can never make everybody happy at once, but at the best, you can just try and be open about your processes, making sure that information that is provided is across the board. If I'm telling you, Lucy, that this is the option, these are the options of help, I have to be able to tell Tom and Harry the same thing. And so if you decide to act on it, you cannot blame those two for not. So nobody can blame you to say, well, she was given preferential treatment, she knew about it. So that's the whole way we're trying to address it. Access to information, the same level to everyone. Then the ones that are obviously more interested, sometimes they would go the extra mile, and then the returns will speak for itself. But that's as much as we can do in terms of a donor. And to be fair, there's a lot of other donors who would never go through a lot of the trouble that we do. But we genuinely believe in empowering Seychellois to take care of its oceans, to take care of its environment. And so this is why we do actually then spend a lot of extra time just making sure that the processes are sound.
And it sounds amazing and super transparent, which is quite rare in Seychelles for these sorts of organizations. Yeah. So it's really interesting to dig into this. I think a lot of the public maybe aren't aware of the complexities of the organization. So the Blue Grant Fund is one of your flagship initiatives, but there's often confusion about who can access it and how. Mm-hmm. What kind of projects do you really want to support, and what's the impact you're hoping they'll have?
Okay, so yes, our Blue Grants Fund, yes, sometimes quite confusing to a lot of people, especially with some of the other programs that I've just talked about that are not necessarily open to everyone. So through the BGF, it's open to Seychellois, every Seychellois above 18 years, so you have to be an adult, you have to be able to contract. So you can do that either as a business, as an individual, so just you are a researcher, I'm a person, I have a really good idea, I want to apply. You can be an NGO, you can be a CBO, you can also be a government organization, a department in a ministry, but you have a really good project. So then we go to the next level of eligibility. We do have 5 strategic objectives. And these objectives, they cut across marine protected areas, so biodiversity conservation, fisheries, so sustainable fisheries, and management. It cuts across protection of critical habitats, so for example, coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves. Also addresses resilience for climate change. And then also then finally it does help promote business ideas and business models that can help Seychelles diversify its blue economy, diversify and grow its blue economy. So if you have a good idea, you're a Seychellois, you have a good idea that is under those 5 objectives, and every year when we do put out the call for proposal, grant by invitation or otherwise, we specify which of those objectives we are opening every year. It's not every year that we open all of those objectives. So then it would be up to the applicants to make sure that the projects that they're submitting are able to align. In terms of impact, obviously, so we do an exercise with our partners, with the key government organizations every year to make sure that the SOs, the strategic objectives that we are advertising, is relevant, because we want to fund things that the country really needs. So if for a particular year we know climate change is at focus, or protected areas is the focus, then we will open those. And we go around, we consult, and we do actually give a list of potential project ideas or the big lines that we want people to focus on. Because in that particular point, this is where we're looking to have the maximum impact. And if you hit the brief, you meet the eligibility, you've aligned, and you are able to demonstrate how you fit into those national priorities, so then your projects become more competitive, and this is the ones that we award. We have the 3 categories of funding, so small, very small grants, and usually to individuals, first-time applicants, up to 100,000 rupees. Then we have between 100,000 to 1 million for the medium grants. And this can be your businesses, but also individuals. And then we have a large category, up to 2 million rupees, but this is for government organizations, large NGOs, or very established NGOs, because the reporting requirements are greater. It's a larger amount of funds, so accountability is a bit more, and we find that it's more difficult for individuals and smaller businesses to do that, so we haven't opened that category up to them. And so then that's how it works, and when we open, they would apply. Usually, if it's for the medium and large grants, we allow concept notes, so just to give you ideas, and then we give you feedback on it, and then you go back and you refine those ideas, you add your budget, and then you would submit that to us for review. And the technical committee reviews the projects. If you are really good, you've succeeded. Sometimes we might ask little tweaks if we really believe that this project has scope, and then it's brought to the attention of the SeyCCAT board for final approval. And thereafter, we award the grants for the projects to begin.
Amazing. Can I ask you, a few people that I've spoken to have claimed that smaller projects are often encouraged to partner with larger NGOs, potentially excluding grassroots innovation. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Okay, that's an interesting question. To be fair, there are instances where, as part of the recommendations, when you look at the things that the individuals or the small organizations they're trying to do, it's very big in its ambition. Not that we're trying to stifle ambition, but we have to be realistic in how we award. Because part of the process of awarding a grant, mindful that you're not paying me back this money, it is a one-off. I am trusting in your idea. So I have, as an investor, as a donor, I have to see the potential for that project to succeed. And sometimes just on their own, there's a lot of risks that cannot be managed by themselves. So this is where we try to say, well, so-and-so has some capacity or some resources that we feel will add value to your project. And so we encourage them. We never force grantees to partner, but we encourage them to consider joining forces or adding partnerships that then helps them to address some of the risks that we think are deal breakers and that could ultimately cause them. But then people sometimes interpret that to say that we're trying to leave them out of it. We're trying to say give money to the other, but it becomes very difficult because somebody has to bear the risk. As much as we're trying to de-risk those innovation, those new ideas, there has to be some level of securities that we can then relay to our donors. And again, if we have $200,000 that we've awarded in grants, but we don't have anything to show for it, then I, as the face of SeyCCAT, I cannot go outside again and ask for money because it's just money that's going down the drain. And this is not what we're trying to do. And I think that's sometimes the difficulty that we encounter. But since I've been here, I've been really trying to explain that to people in a very open way. So you know where we're coming from when we tell you this. We've also introduced detailed feedback letters. When I came, we used to just give you a letter to tell you you've not been successful. But now we go back and tell you why you've not been successful. We give you the feedback comments so that you can go and work on it and come back better. So the idea is to ultimately build the capacities of those small organizations for them to be able to access. But it is competitive, and more so now it's very competitive. We're getting 70, 80 projects per call, and it is quite competitive based on the amount of resources that we have.
Thank you. Thank you for being so open. It's very refreshing. Who actually governs SeyCCAT? What's the role of the board? Who appoints its members? Is there any overlap between government actors, funders, grantees that raises potential conflict of interest concerns?
Okay. So SeyCCAT itself is the only public-private trust fund in Seychelles, in that it has shared interest, shared shareholder interest from government and private. Our board is currently a minority government, so we have 9 board members, and 6 of those are non-governmental. So we do have the representative from the Ministry of Environment, which is the minister and who happens to be ex officio, because Government of Seychelles is a contract to the establishment of SeyCCAT. And then we have TNC, which is also the ex officio director, and together they are the chair and the vice chair of the board. And then we do have a representative appointed by the Minister of Finance, because SeyCCAT is a financial institution, and ultimately we do answer under the authorities under the financial sector. Then we have representations, local and international, that cuts across the main thematics that we work with. So we have Chamber of Commerce, we have Blue Economy, we have fisheries experts, we have CBO, so SEPs, so looking at the non-state actors that are really going to be key in benefiting from our board. We have the Tourism Association, so the big sectors that influence the things we fund, but also the values that the trusts have. And then we also do have 2 observers on our board that serve as additional institutional memory, but also who are experts in the field that then provides advisory support to our board before they make decisions. And then ultimately we have our committees. So the technical committee, which is the Blue Grants Fund Committee, that is a group of 14 experts across the sectors that we work with, and they are responsible to evaluate every single project that we award. So the Secretariat does not have any role in reviewing projects and approving projects. We are just there to facilitate. But of course, we do read all of the projects in order to facilitate. And then there is also a finance committee, because SeyCCAT, as part of its key role, it has its endowment. It also has a lot of financial responsibilities, and we do have a strong finance committee that provides guidance to our board in the decisions that it makes. So that is the governance structure of the trust.
Thank you. Makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about transparency. In cases where private companies fund projects through SeyCCAT, for example, luxury resorts, funding marine NGOs, how do you manage possible conflicts? For example, Cheval Blanc funding MCSS while also being responsible for the destruction of the environment MCSS is said to protect. How do you navigate these issues?
Okay. Yes. So fortunately, we do not have at the moment any of those big hotels or investors that are directly putting resources into the trust. So we've not had to deal with that in a direct level, but obviously we do operate in Seychelles, and we do have to be in a position to navigate those issues when they arise. As much as possible, we are not getting involved directly. In fact, we do not have an advocacy role as part of the trust. In fact, it is legislated. So our role is to facilitate access to funds in a transparent way. And there are exclusions in our legislation of where we are not able to get funds. So anything that is deemed to be unethical or is against those direct environmental and social impacts, we are not supposed to be taking funds from. And so far, we have made sure that we have that box. When we do have grantees that are working or are involved, we make sure that their activities, so we are not seen to be co-financing any of those projects. So that's why we do very thorough due diligence before we award funds. In fact, we can even go as far as saying if there are those things that are being contravened, we can revoke grants that have already been approved. But we've not had to do that so far, but we do keep a close eye on some of the national issues that are occurring.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Can I ask you what your personal opinion on this is, if you care to share?
Oh, personal. I think coming from a conservation background, I am a conservation biologist by trade. So, of course, I believe that development has to be done in a way that is in harmony with nature. We are part of nature, and so therefore, as one species, we cannot expect that we can come around and bulldoze our way into doing development in a way that is not sound. And sadly, sometimes, and in the recent years, it has become a bit more difficult for environmentalists in the country to fathom the rate and scale at which development has been happening. Working in the space, of finance, you also then are in that middle where you have to be in a position to make decisions about striking a balance between growth, change, livelihoods, prosperity for country, whilst at the same time developing. So it becomes very, very difficult. And that's why I'm very pleased that as SeyCCAT, we do not have to be stuck in the middle of that. But as a person living in Seychelles, as a Seychellois, I think we can probably do better. We can do better. There's a lot of innovations that are out there that would allow us to do better. I think we just have to all be more open to doing things in a certain way, to make that development a bit more expensive so that it is more green, or to limit the numbers so that we are able to have, a better quality of the services that we offer. Of course, I want Seychelles to keep growing, to become to stay a rich and happy country. But sometimes it comes at a compromise, and the compromise cannot always come from the side of conservation. It has to also sometimes come from the side of economics, and that's just me as a Seychellois, not as the CEO of SeyCCAT. And as I've mentioned, you would never see an open, what would you say? You would not see a position paper from SeyCCAT saying it is against it is. We would never do that. Yeah. In fact, it is not. We're not able to do things like that. So.
Well, I really appreciate your candor and your openness again. So what is your relationship with government? Because they are involved on the board and also in terms of funding. So some critics say government interests quietly steer conservation agendas. What's your take on this?
Into SeyCCAT?
Just in general, from what you've seen in the conservation space in Seychelles.
Okay. I think I can only speak on the relationship that SeyCCAT has with government. So having been developed or born from a partnership between government and a non-government entity, we would always have ties with government, but we are fully independent in our settings, in our decision making, and also in our financials, which is something that I think we are very proud of, that we've been able to maintain that independence. But then in terms of also us being relevant, if you are going outside and you're fundraising, you're saying you're bringing money into Seychelles. Ultimately, the government of Seychelles is the custodian of the country. So we cannot go outside and fundraise on things that are against national priorities. So this is where we always go side by side with government. We make sure that government endorses the program ideas that we have, so that when we bring it back in country, it is allowing Seychelles to fulfill a lot of its commitments. So in that sense, we are almost always making sure that we are aligned. However, we do have some other little programs, in our endowment that is just specifically for the organization. And in those cases, we are able to go on our own, and with the guidance of our board, we are able to make those investment decisions. But it is a necessity for us to be working in Seychelles to remain relevant for the country. So that's the balance.
Okay, thank you. How do you measure your impact beyond reporting back to donors? What does success look like for you in the real world? Just not just reports or conferences.
Definitely. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And this year, for the first time, we are doing an impact report. And, it's coinciding with our 10 years. And that's one of the key questions that I want us to be. I know I see them here myself, and I can tell you about it, but I don't want just us to tell people about it. So we are doing an independent exercise. So looking at all of the environmental, social, and governance, metrics, and saying, okay, but how much have we contributed in everything that Seychelles has been doing recently? What has SeyCCAT contributed towards that? So, there's a lot of big things we can talk about. We can talk about the 30%. We can talk about the Marine Spatial Plan, which we've been working together with TNC, facilitating for government for the past decade. It's been done. We're ready to transition to implementation. These are huge undertakings that SeyCCAT has been able to support. We've been able to bring in additional funds. We've fundraised over $10 million, brought it back into the country, delivered it. We've also now attracted new partners that we're trying to work for coral reefs. We've penetrated on the regional side. We're also now attracting new funds from SeyPF that we're supporting CBOs specifically. We can't fund government. We are only funding small organizations. So we have been able to do a lot. But I just want us to be in a position where, we can let the work speak for itself, so that people know. And I think more and more now people know about SeyCCAT. We talk a lot about it. We've tried to explain it to people, simplify it, even producing products that simplifies what we do so that people can see. So very soon we should be able to demonstrate in very concrete terms, so that people can say, okay, those people are working. It's a small team, it's 10 people, but they do a lot. Yeah.
Could you highlight a few success stories that have made a real difference for Seychelles, the people, the ecosystem?
Okay, so stories of change. That's one. It's very in my head. It's in my head because we've been talking a lot about it with the impact report. So I think what we've been able to do is, for me as a Seychellois, very proud, is that there is a fund for Seychellois. It's being run by Seychellois. We are the ones that are going outside. We are not compromising on our integrity for the nature of the funds that we're bringing in. And that's one thing I really, really stress on.
That's huge.
We can't keep letting donors come and tell us where to put money. We have to be in a position where we go out and we say, we need this, not we coming to fund this. And so that's one of the things. It makes it a lot more difficult sometimes, but that's something that I'm very proud of. That's one of the things that I'm very, very proud that we do. We have also then, when you fund a small project of an individual who would never be able to get funds from outside. So when you are able to fund those small projects and then you see them succeed, and then you see them come back because they have grown in confidence and they submit a bigger project and you have repeated. And so we have a few of our grantees that we have been able to invest in their development. Individuals, young Seychellois with amazing ideas that otherwise it would have been super difficult. They wouldn't have gone to the bank to get that kind of loan and have that kind of debt so early on in their life. So these are some of the things that we please the researchers that we've been able to follow, to support. And of course now with the protected areas, we know what we've done is going to be there for a long time to come for those that will come after us. There's a few good ones that I'm thinking of, and I'm just thinking also on how we can continue to build that. There's a lot more people I know, especially for maybe the fishers and people like that, who sometimes feel they're a bit disenfranchised as part of the work we do. But it's also then trying to get them around the table for them to tell us, well, we don't like this that you're doing. It's not often that they will come up, and even when you do go out and try to ask them about it, they're not very forthcoming. So that's one of the things maybe we would still need to work on a bit to see how to level the playing field continuously for everyone. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. And I would love to highlight some of the projects on Seychelles at Heart if you're open to it. I know you've got to go at 3, so I will wrap it up a little bit. I've just got a few more questions to ask you. One is, once a project funding has ended, what happens next? Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that the initiatives are sustainable rather than just fizzling out when the money runs dry?
Yes, so that's a very good question, because that's one of the key metrics that we do have for our projects. In fact, one of the approving criteria for your projects is on sustainability, and a lot of projects fall short. It's like we want to know that the investments, that initial investment that we're making into your project, we can see the light for subsequently, how you will use the equipment you're procuring, how you intend to work with partnership, how you intend to upscale, use it across multiple sites. And so we do have a monitoring and evaluation framework that we introduced a couple of years ago as part of the projects, and we do have a function in-house. We do have a staff whose responsibility is to make sure that across the reporting we are able to capture where we see projects that are not going to, and if they are ultimately going to fizzle out, then we sometimes have to say no to those projects, because they do not show us they don't encourage us to think that they are going to succeed beyond the project funds. And so we do make that assessment we take it quite seriously, in fact, and your project might be rejected on that basis. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm going to jump to the next section of questions about greenwashing, because there's growing concerns around greenwashing in Seychelles, mm-hmm. not specific to your organization.
Okay.
In relation to quite a few NGOs, which I won't mention.
Okay.
The idea that I've been hearing from a lot of people in the community is that there's a lot of money that goes into conservation, and that money is used for surveys, reports, summits, but there's little visible change in the long term. What's your honest take on this perception?
Well, I suppose there is always going to be, abuse and misuse of resources if it's not being monitored or a close eye is not being kept on it. I'm not maybe familiar with the examples that you have, but I know in the past there has been records or reports of parties that may be doing that. And sometimes they also then end up giving a bad name to everyone, to all of us who are in this space, and it does make fundraising that much more harder. So yeah, I definitely would not be one who would support any such practices. In fact, the best way to address it is just to try and be as open and transparent. And we just really don't want people to kind of associate these kinds of behaviors with us. Greenwashing is really unethical. It violates trust. It violates the trust of people who are counting on you, but also it violates the trust of the people who actually invest in you. And so that's one of the key things that we do not want to have as part of our values and as part of our organization. So trust is one of our core values, and it's the trust that we give to our stakeholders. It's the trust that we are going to take decisions that are not going to directly affect them or knowingly affect them. You know, sometimes there are things that we cannot control, but we make sure that this is not a practice that we want to do. Yeah.
A past guest on our platform claimed no one can account for the $1 million donated by Leonardo DiCaprio. And this is actually one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because on the platform, we want to open it up so that people can speak from their experiences, their ideas, but we also want to make sure that we're seeing both sides of the argument. So was SeyCCAT ever involved in managing or tracking that money? And do you know where it went? Can you maybe enlighten the public on this?
Yeah. Anyways, I think that was probably like a misreferencing or misinterpretation of what that 1 million was. So as part of the fundraising for the impact investment, so we did have some large international players and investors, and Leonardo DiCaprio was one of the first ones. So we did have, for example, the Lyda Hill Foundations, Oceans 5 through the Rockefeller Group, and then also Leonardo DiCaprio. They were some of the ones that actually helped us to buy back the debt. So they contributed, and as part of the money, some of that was also then going to come to SeyCCAT through the mechanisms that I have explained, and this is where the money went. So it was not like an isolated 1 million, it was part of the pool of funds that allowed for the transaction to happen, and then through the proceeds, so it was going to go towards conservation. So I mentioned that over the 20 years, we're going to have the 5 million, and it's in that pot. So then every year we get 200,000 until 2036, where we would have maxed out that money. So that's where it's going.
Perfect. So it's fully accountable.
It's fully accounted for.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to jump into fishing quickly. Let's see how many questions we can get through. Seychelles has pledged to protect 30% of its EEZ, but some argue the protections affect local fishers more than foreign fleets. What's SeyCCAT's position on the current balance between marine protection and the rights of Seychellois fishers?
Okay. I think that's all. It's often a perception that we would have only consulted. As part of the MSP process, government made it very, very open, consulted widely, over 300 meetings had over the past 10 years with key people, including fishers. And a lot of those issues had been discussed over and over and over again. And for us to come to the compromise in terms of the places where we have now protected. And it is a balance. Obviously, there are those no-take areas, so 15% is no-take, and then you have the other 15% that is sustainable use. So Seychelles could have said it's going to go 30% no-take, highly and fully protected areas, but it decided to not go this way because of the concerns that were captured as part of those discussions. So I don't think it's fair to say that, we're targeting more the small scale or artisanal fishers versus, because even on the industrial side, they have also lost a lot of areas. There's a lot of already fisheries exclusion zone for industrial fishing, but nonetheless, I think there's a good balance. In fact, in the inner group, where it's like sort of in the Amirans, where most of the small scale semi-industrial might still operate, all of these have been factored into the zoning design. So, yeah, I think, like I said in the beginning, it's very difficult to always have everybody happy. There will always be, but it has to be a decision that is for greater good, that addresses most of the issues and that has a possibility of helping us achieve some of those priorities. It is a very tough place sometimes to set a policy, and I speak from experience here, I've worked for government for over a decade. It's very difficult to strike the right balance. But the good thing is that these things are always adaptive. They are not going to be there forever. They are going to be monitored. There will be scope and subject to amendments and improvements over the years as the MSP becomes implemented. And that is, for me, the most effective thing, because people will continuously be engaged, and if they feel that something is really not working, then we can always improve it. But sometimes we just have to start. We have to be honest that there are issues of overfishing in Seychelles. There are issues of mismanagement of fisheries in Seychelles, and we have to start somewhere before it gets worse and we cannot undo it. And so I think, from me, that's the kind of approach that I think people should see it.
It's interesting because the way that I understand it is that some local fishers feel that their pool of where they can fish from is being reduced, but yet the big fishing industry, they're not really limited as such. I guess how I understand it is that local fishers feel that they are being restricted because of the overfishing and the environmental impact of the big fishing industry. That's how I understand it.
Okay. I suppose that is a far bigger conversation. I believe that it's more into that management side that would really go to the authorities then that are responsible, and I do not feel that I would be adequate in my answers for addressing that kind of question. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to finish with one question. Seychelles is at a crossroads, fragile environment versus rapid development. From where you sit, are we getting the balance right, or are we risking short-term economic gains at the cost of long-term ecological damage?
Okay. That is an advocacy question there. That's a difficult one. And as SeyCCAT, like I mentioned, our values are around helping sustainable growth, sustainable development of the country. And we make sure that within the remits of our organizations, the decisions that we make, the activities we fund, they are not going to take us in that direction of tipping the balance in the wrong direction. So definitely on our side, that's the commitment that we make. But as a whole, as a country, I think then that's a bigger conversation that's left to be had.